I want to welcome the panelists today as well as the audience. We are very excited to have this discussion on quantum computing with you. And we have some amazingly talented people in the space on this panel today. What I'd like to do is start off by getting each of our panelists to give us a quick overview of what specifically they're doing in quantum computing and what they think the future looks for the next few years. And to do that, I'd like to start with my friend Peter Chapman from IonQ. Then we'll go to Dr. Fitzsimons, of course, Dan Caruso, and Professor Hensinger. Peter, why don't you tell us a little bit about what you're currently doing in quantum computing and how you think this affects the audience over the next 5-year period? Go ahead, sir.
Thanks, William. So we at IonQ are building trapped ion quantum computers that we believe in the next several years will be powerful enough to be able to challenge supercomputers or the cloud itself. So it will enable kind of the next 100 years of innovation in the for society and mankind, to be able to take on many of mankind's greatest challenges.
That's very cool. Dr. Fitzsimons?
Thanks. So I run a startup called Horizon Quantum Computing. And basically the background of most of the people in Horizon is that we've come from academia. We've all worked in the field for a long time. And we've been focused on the task of trying to make quantum computers accessible to domain experts. So if you have a problem that you want to run, it's computationally intensive, how do you actually make use of quantum hardware to do that? Of course, there's a major challenge with quantum hardware, but the algorithms are going to be the next barrier, and that's what we're focused on.
Excellent. Dan?
Hi, thank you for including us on this panel. So ColdQuanta is the leader in cold atom quantum technology. And we're taking that cold atom technology and we're applying it to multiple different applications, including quantum computing. So our quantum computer is the first commercial quantum computer is going to be about later this year at about 100 qubits and good characteristics on the other aspects of computing. And we think there's going to be room for lots of different types, modalities of quantum computers, given how big applications are, how big the market will be. And so we think cold atom will play a significant role as part of that collection of technologies with computing.
Very cool. And Professor Hensinger?
Hi, yeah, so I'm leading a research group developing practical quantum computers at the University of Sussex, and I'm also chief scientist and chairman of a quantum computing company, Universal Quantum. So what we are trying to do is build trapped ion quantum computers, and what we focus on in particularly heavy engineering in order to build machines that can host millions, eventually millions of qubits. And in order to do that, we're using a particular technology, microwave technology, which enables to scale maybe much easier than other techniques currently being used. And so we started 2 years ago as a company, and we've hired now a fantastic engineering team, and now we're in the process of building first machines based on the working principles we've published a few years ago in a blueprint of how you would go about building practical quantum computers with millions of qubits.
Excellent. Well, you know, there's a lot of hype in quantum and around any new technology, and I know each of you personally have been, focused on your work and your task. One thing I'd like to set an expectation for the audience is, when do these machines become useful? Not a universal quantum computer, but when is an enterprise or a customer, be they in pharmaceuticals or maybe finance or whatever industry you want to pick, when does that become useful? And what should people be doing to prepare their company and their enterprise for this kind of shift that Peter described in his opening statements, where we're enlightening this innovation for the next 100 years? And so, I'd love to hear, Professor Hensinger, if you continue that from you, and then we'll go around the room. Again, when should they expect this to be affecting their business? When should they be making investments or learning and training around the technology?
So in order to answer that question, I often use an example from conventional computing. So the first conventional computer was actually built in the 1940s and arguably decided Second World War. When I grew up in the 70s, I learned typewriting on a mechanical typewriter because computers weren't widely available. So quantum computing is a little bit like that. There is not one point in time when there's going to be a quantum computer that can tackle all the really interesting problems. But it's a hard quest, and the build the hardware is actually really, really difficult. And so we're going to slowly, one by one, go from one application to another. And what that means is for business that it's very important to start early working together with both with quantum software and hardware companies, because what that means is that we kind of squeeze every little bit out of the technology right now, and we kind of focus our development in a direction that is in a way governed by the most interesting applications which are out there. And so just like in with conventional computing, it's kind of a long development process where you start now, and we're going to see one by one more interesting applications appearing. And so we'll see this maybe in the next 5 years. We're going to see maybe first interesting business applications, and they're going to come one by one. And they're going to come as the hardware becomes more powerful, but equally also as the software becomes better in the sense that it's capable of solving tasks with less physical resources, because that's kind of what makes it really hard in quantum computing right now. And we kind of really push the hardware very slowly but surely to the point where we're going to really see really interesting applications.
Excellent. And Fitzsimons, I saw you shake your head there. Are you on that 3 to 5 year time frame?
So I'm not sure. I'm shaking my head. Actually, I agree with a lot of what Winnie said. Actually, I agree in the sense I really believe that quantum computing is computing all again. And that's, I've spent 17 years doing this. I left academia to start a company because I really do think we're at that critical point. But it's the 1940s now. That's where we are. We're not in the 1980s. We're not in the 2000s. It's the 1940s. These devices are really at a very early stage, but they hold tremendous potential. And we're really focused on how to get the most out of these systems, how to use them for practical tasks. We're in a really, really interesting time now because 18 months ago, Google put this quantum supremacy paper on the archive showing for the first time convincing evidence that they had built a device that was hard to simulate. I know there has also been previous work from Monroe's group and things like this that has also shown evidence of being hard to simulate. And this is interesting because we're not yet at the point where it's useful. You can't use it for a business task more efficiently than you could, a conventional cluster or something like that. But the quantum computers are doing something interesting, something we can't simulate. So it's really a time for algorithms builders now to try to figure out, can we start to make use of these? And we don't really know, but I would say first applications within 3 to 5 years is definitely a reasonable expectation. But this is first applications, but I think let's go.
And in fairness to you, you were shaking your head yes in agreement, not no. Dan, why don't you tell us your thoughts? What does it look like to you? When does this become real for the people in the audience where they need to be looking at applying it, and when do they need to start preparing?
Yeah, so I come at this from maybe a different perspective. I'm a career entrepreneur and been 3 startups, all of which had exits of north of 10 billion. The last one of which I was the founding CEO of, and we just exited last year. And all those were built around the internet. They were, when we started the first one, people really didn't know what the internet was. If you walk down the street and ask someone about the internet, they wouldn't know. In fact, I wouldn't even been one asking because I didn't know what the internet was at that point. And somehow we went real quickly from the internet being a word that wasn't even in most people's vocabulary to the internet being, in everyone's vocabulary. We went from what's the internet going to do? People scratching their head and answering, I don't know, maybe email, maybe chat rooms. And people were like, what's a chat room? To the internet affecting everything. And we went from when's the internet going to matter? And people saying, well, maybe little things will happen 3 to 5 years from now, or, but you'll see what the world looks like 20 years from now. To the 3 to 5 years, it was proliferating all over the place. Now, quantum computing does have, a period of time before it gestates, but it's not just a function of time. It's a function of time and money, resources. And we are at kind of a turning point with quantum, I think, this year, and in part signified by what Peter was able to accomplish. There's so much money out there that wants to invest in deep tech, and there are so many applications that are be requiring of quantum technology that so you're going to have a use communities that begin to grow exponentially. Just look at autonomous vehicles alone and all the startups that are getting funded there. They're going to be customers for quantum technology, before too long, and they're going to be demanding it. A lot of money is going to pour directly into quantum technology, especially quantum computing, but other forms of quantum technology as well. So I'm optimistic that although the next 2 or 3 years might feel progress in quantum computing isn't as fast as we want it to be, I think the curve of progress is going to be nothing like the 1940s or the 1970s or even the early 2000s. The world has changed a lot in the last year in a way that's going to benefit quantum. Money's going to pour in, innovation is going to happen, more risk is going to be taken, and quantum's going to be one of the beneficiaries of that.
That's awesome. And Peter, I purposely ended with you, and Dan hinted at this, but I wanted to say, you must have a very unique view on this, having just taken IonQ public, being the first publicly traded, real quantum computing company at about a $2 billion valuation, if I believe. So I'd be very interested to hear your timeline. When do you think this is going to happen? When do you think people are going to be effective? Some of the statements you made in the press have been seen in some ways a little more aggressive. Personally, I'm a big fan of that. I think we should be doing all this today. So maybe you could give us your thoughts and opinions.
Yeah. In a previous life, I worked with Ray Kurzweil, and Ray, was a renowned futurist, and he wrote books on that was always predicting the future. And so one of the things we did in preparation for those books was to look at various technologies and when did we think they were going to become commercially available, and then so that we could also time our investments so that they were, appropriately timed to when we thought the technology. So as an example, even though at the time we didn't have a cell phone that was powerful enough, we predicted when a cell phone would have a camera, memory, and a processor that would be powerful enough to be able to do optical character recognition. And we predicted it down to the month, which it was pretty cool. And so kind of the same applies here. Companies need to think about when will this hardware be here, come up with their own kind of prediction. Our particular technology, we think within 3 years we'll have a rack-mounted room temperature quantum computer. And that will start to, probably 4 years, start to take on the world's largest supercomputers for certain applications. Then the question is back from that, when should you start working on it? Well, it depends on your application, but I would think fairly quickly one should be starting to think about those things, because you don't want to wait until the day where it's ready to go. Kind of to Dan's point, the internet came. If you were picking up on it the day that you were there, you were already too late, right?
Yep.
And there was many companies that were, got in trouble because they didn't recognize that trend. Mobile computing was the same way, right? In each wave of these technologies, if you're late in adopting the technology, it means your company is already behind, right? And for some companies, they never catch up. I'll also just make an interesting point, which is I think part of the power of quantum computing, we're all focused on the hardware and when will it get here. But I think actually one of the really interesting aspects is quantum computers forces you to think about the problem differently. And that has value unto itself. That I think that in the next several years, there will be breakthroughs, which is just simply forcing application developers to think about a new way to approach a problem. And so I think that we see, my guess is in the next year, we will see probably the first new endpoint and application, which is, we're not talking about broad quantum advantage, but the first application where somebody is doing something unique that they couldn't do in a commercial sense, on a classical computer.
Yeah, I would say I think that's coming. I mean, for me, being not of all your backgrounds, I'm more on the Dan side, a serial entrepreneur and basically a software developer, right? I'm always telling people, true, the machines right now are less computers, more really great lab experiments, equipment for exploring this quantum landscape. But that switch, I agree with everything you guys are saying. It's going to happen very fast. And so I definitely think that the audience today should be preparing today, whether it be having their software teams look at learning what tools and frameworks and stuff to use, or exploring through the hardware that's available and some of these kits. It leads to a very interesting questions for enterprise, though. Enterprise are driven on some pretty basic fundamentals, right? They want to have a quick time to value. They want to have some enterprise outcomes, and they want to be able to measure a return on investment. From your standpoint, and Peter, will stick with you and then go back around the room, what, as an enterprise manager, say I'm at a pharmaceutical company or a finance company, I see these changes coming, how should I be looking at budgets? What should my team look like? How much should I be investing? Who should I be hiring right now if I'm setting up a small, call it Tiger team to prepare us for quantum computing, what's a team look like? How much do you think I should be investing on that? And then, of course, the big question for each of you, especially our friends with hardware, how much should I expect to be spending to access one of these machines?
Yeah. So, you know, in the last 2 years, we said to people, you should be getting up to speed on quantum. You should be learning about it. You should build kind of muscle memory around quantum, get your people up to speed. I think we're now within 3 years of having a quantum computer that can do some really interesting things. So now we're moving into a different phase. Now we're already in, you should be thinking about what that application is, because it'll probably take you a couple of years to develop it. So we think that now is the time to actually start working on actual planning for an actual application so we'll take advantage of quantum. We're very quickly getting to the point where, you know, if you don't have something in quantum already, you're probably already starting to be too late.
To be behind.
Yeah.
That's very interesting. I personally feel the same way. Now, of course, we're all involved in the quantum industry, right? So we're going to have a nice view of that. But Dr. Fitzsimons, you know, what are your opinions on that? On building a team, does a composite of the team look like? Where should I be making an investment if I want to prepare my company for quantum?
Sure. So I mean, I agree with what Peter's saying. One of the things that I pay a lot of attention to at the moment is how rapidly the technology is changing. And there's been this kind of quantum Moore's law that has played out in quantum computing over the last 20 years or so, where the doubling time when you number of qubits or something like that has been about once every 5 years. But over the last 4 or 5 years, that has really shrunk. And now it's shorter than the classical Moore's law. So now you see doubling times that are more like 12 months or less. So there's a potential that things will change very rapidly. But there's still quite a few unknowns. You know, I left an academic career to start a company that builds dev tools, particularly because I agree exactly with what Peter is saying, that now is the time for people to start thinking about how they build quantum-enhanced applications. And if you're going to put a lot of money into developing a code base now for computation-intensive tasks, you should do it in a way that you're able to port over when the time comes, rather than having to write it off. So from our point of view, we see we're building also as a way of mitigating future risk, and you know, mitigating the risk of your code becoming obsolete.
Excellent. Dan, what are your opinions on this? I mean, I'm sitting at an enterprise. I'm hearing all about this at Quantum. I'm here at this Astor Perkins panel. I want to leave and take some action. Who should I be hiring? What should I be planning on budgeting? Like, what would that look like from your perspective?
Yeah, I think if you're a part of a larger corporation, getting real active in the ecosystem is the key. So instead of thinking it solely from the perspective of what skills do I need to hire to start developing our quantum, reach our thoughts about our quantum application, how do you get plugged into the ecosystem? How do you work with companies like those who are represented on this call and the dozens of others that are forming and beginning to accelerate their efforts in a purely quantum mode, as well as the investor community around them. So if you're a very large corporation, is your corp dev department, do you have a strategic investment fund? And if so, are you using those ways of getting up to speed on who's really doing what in quantum, and where will your alliances come from? You know, larger companies should be thinking as much about who they want to be aligned with as they should about, you know, what work do they want to do in-house, because they're going to need to leverage, for the very reason you said, they're going to need to leverage those who can direct their entire business livelihood at quantum, because, you know, we could take a longer point of view. Our investors are investing in a long-term quantum roadmap, but a larger corporation is going to want to understand, how do I get returns in a more tangible way and more quickly? And, you know, a relatively small amount of investment, if leveraged through others, can be the key to staying current, but not trying to build a big staff too early.
Right. Professor Hensinger, you, much like Dr. Fitzsimons, are coming out of academia, now doing your universal quantum computing company. I want to change it a little bit for you. Not only how do you see what we just asked, but how do you see the universities creating, because this will lead into our next topic, a quantum workforce so that we have people to actually do all of this work that we're discussing?
Yeah, so this is a really good point you're raising, and actually it's in a way what I wanted to put into my answer there already. So let me start by saying something which you kind of all know. Quantum computing is highly disruptive. Disruptive meaning like Google search algorithm that, if you don't use Yahoo or all of the other search engines anymore, use Google because it's just much better. Quantum is the same way. But quantum is also running an evolution. This is in conventional computing. In the 1940s, we used it to break and encryption. We had no idea we can use it for medical imaging, for all the other things we use computers right now. Now, as an enterprise, you don't expect that we're just going to deliver a quantum computer, which we're going to place in your basement in 5 years' time, and then you're just going to run a few programs, and this is it. It's actually quite different. Quantum computing is nothing like conventional computing. We have to develop new quantum algorithms, and we have to make sure we are able to run them on the very limited hardware we have available. What that means is that as a customer, you need to start working now to understand what problems in your enterprise are really critical and can be solved by a quantum computer. A quantum computer is not some wonder machine which can solve everything. It can solve certain problems, but we are right now developing the applications along with the hardware. And now let's come to what you just noted, and that is the training of a skilled workforce. You cannot just buy in a person and say, look, you're going to sort the quantum portfolio for my company, and that's going to work fine. What you need to train your workforce, and that means, in my opinion, the best way to do that is to enter into relationships, into development relationships. You say, look, you can go to a hardware company, a software company, or probably to both, and you're going to say, look, we have this very interesting, this is our business. Can you even help us understand where the application is going to lie? And once we know that, can you streamline the hardware development or the software development so we can be a little bit earlier? And can you help us actually develop the applications hand in hand? You can obviously say, look, I'm just going to hold off. I'm going to stand back. Third quantum computers are not quite ready yet. I'm just going to come back in 5 or 10 years' time when somebody has built a 1 million qubit quantum computer. And yes, you can do that. But what you'll find is that other enterprise customers have been working with, for the last 10 years then, on applications. And the question you have to ask yourself, will these companies share their purpose-developed hardware or application development with you, or will they do exactly what Google has done and just say, look, we're going to obviously capitalize on the investment we have made for the last 10 years. So training is absolutely critical. Relations with both hardware and software companies are absolutely critical. And if you do this, you can get the right workforce into your enterprise, but you can also start early developing or looking into the applications that are relevant for your business.
So, all right, so we're coming to the end of the panel. I have a great question for you for last, but kind of continue what you're saying. I agree. Look, I'm a software developer. I looked at quantum 7 years ago. I got fell in love with it, got very interested in it. 3 years ago, I started the company, and I thought what the people in the audience might think. I could take a team of software developers, I could make them quantum software developers, right? And that's, I'm here to tell everybody, we got a lot of experience in software. That is not exactly possible. What everybody's saying here is true. You need to start preparing today. You need to be going. So we've got just enough for each of you to have 1 minute each. Here's the setup. Right now, I don't think it's the 40s, and I know it's not the 70s. I feel like we're more around 1963, and a guy named Jack has just brought a thing called a microprocessor in the room and said, this is going to be awesome. And everybody's thinking about how to apply that microprocessor to the problems of the current day. Not, kind of Wayne Gretzky, they're playing where the puck is, not where it's going. What I'd like to ask each of you as a closing question is, if you think of that timeline, kind of pre-quantum and post-quantum, it's 1963. Nobody's thinking about autonomous vehicles or iPhones or the internet or any of these disruptive things that Peter, when he started off, talked about this major disruption. And Peter, we'll start with you. What are the visionary things? What's that innovation you talked about for the next 100 years? Are there examples you can give us or areas that are interesting to you that you think people aren't looking at? And then we'll go with everybody else. And got about 30, 45 seconds for each of you now. Okay. Peter?
I'm not sure about people not thinking, but clearly we think machine learning will be an early application. I think something that's really interesting that people miss is that on one side, the hardware is getting better, and at the same time, the source requirements for the application is getting smaller. And so those two things are coming together faster than most people think. But we think machine learning will be the first kind of applications, commercial applications.
Very cool. Dan, how about you?
Yeah, what's particularly interesting to me is the combination of different quantum technologies taken as an architecture. So quantum computer, working with quantum sensing, such as the QPS systems, and RF frequency systems. And I think when those technologies get matched together, they're going to be an enabling approach that's going to affect lots of different industries. A few I'll rattle off real quick is, can an autonomous vehicle really be autonomous without quantum? I think we're going to find the answer to that is no. And when the autonomous world gets their head around that, they're going to be a big driver. And it's not going to be quantum computing by itself. It's going to be quantum sensing. It's going to be many different ways. Another good example of that is so much money is being spent on 5G. Well, is 6G or 7G going to be on quantum RF sensing? And when it is, what are the implications of that? Is that really the enabler of the Internet of Things vision that a lot of us talk about? Does that really come into play with robotics? So all these other technology trends, I think, are going to get related to a combination of quantum technologies.
Very interesting. Dr. Fitzsimons, get about 30 seconds.
So I see quantum computing as computing all over again. I've said that before. The tools we've been building are to enable users and programmers to write any of code in MATLAB or C or Julia, whatever language you like, and automatically generate and deploy quantum applications from that to automatically accelerate that code. I think there's going to be an enormous range of applications. If I had to make a bet, I would say applying machine learning to in silico chemistry solutions would be something I would try, but there's still some distance to that.
Very cool. And we'll end with you, Professor Hensinger. What are your thoughts on that?
First, I agree with all what has been previously said by Peter and Joe and Dan, but I'll add one thing to that. Quantum physics is the government theory that underpins any physical system, any chemical reaction, any pharmaceutical. And it's basically conventional computing is impossible, immediately runs out of speed when simulating any of it. And so quantum computing, I think, will play a really integral role in simulating our systems. What that means is in simulating chemical reactions, creating new pharmaceutical new materials. And so I think this is another really, really interesting applications we should watch out for.
Excellent. Well, we have run to the end of our time. I'm going to turn it back over to Catherine. I'd love to thank the panelists and the audience for listening to us ramble about the quantum future. I hope to encourage everyone to go get into quantum computing today. And with that, Catherine, we'll hand it back to you.
Thank you, gentlemen, so much. And please, everyone, give them a round of applause.